This video is all about when to time your carbohydrates and when to place them in terms of the time of day when it comes down to being on a ketogenic or a low-carb diet. Now, I originally wanted this video to be about carb backloading versus the ketogenic diet, meaning I wanted to talk about the two different methodologies and how they are different from one another. However, after doing a lot more research, I discovered that you could truly apply carb backloading principles into the ketogenic diet. Let me first off say that the reason I'm doing this video is because we've had a lot of people comment asking about when they should time their carbohydrates when they're on a ketogenic diet, but also inquiring about the carb backloading strategy in the first place. So what I want to talk about here first is what exactly carb backloading is. You see, what carb backloading is when you're keeping your body extremely insulin sensitive by keeping carbs out of the equation for most of the day and then allocating your carbohydrates around your workout, meaning you're having most of your carbohydrates, if not all of your carbohydrates, immediately following a workout. The idea behind this is your body is extremely insulin sensitive at that point in time. So therefore, the carbs that you consume, in theory, wouldn't have a lot of negative impact on your body. They'd go right into restoring muscle glycogen and allowing you to have a lot more energy during your workout. So here's what the traditional carb backloading, quote unquote, diet looks like. So the carb backloading diet has you go into a ketogenic state for about 10 days. So for 10 days, you're keeping your carbs below 30 grams or so. And then on the 10th day, you add all of your carbs back into the equation immediately following your workout. Again, with the idea being that you are so carb depleted that when you do have carbs, they won't have a negative impact. Again, that's the theory. That doesn't necessarily mean it's the truth. Okay, so then from then on out, if you're following the quote unquote carb backloading diet, you're going to be carb cycling. What that means is once you've gone through your first 10 days, you make it so that when you don't train, on days you don't work out, you keep your carbs very, very low, like under 30 grams. But on the days that you do train, you have carbs after your workout with no real limit on them. Because again, in theory, you're not going to be having an issue because your insulin levels are going to be so low and you're going to be so insulin sensitive. Now, let me first off say that this is not exactly how the human body works, so it's not exactly the best protocol. You see, that's basically what's called carb cycling. And carb cycling, although it has its advantages, can be very, very difficult because it makes insulin levels very volatile. A lot of times, the quickest way to truly be able to change your body composition is to get insulin levels stable. That's why I'm such a fan of the ketogenic diet, because you're never really having these massive, massive spikes in blood glucose. You're able to control them a little bit more and having them nice and even and a little bit more easy to manipulate. So first, let's talk about insulin sensitivity. That's going to help make some sense of a lot of this. You see, in the morning when you first get up, you're in a fasted state. So you're very insulin sensitive, which means when you do have carbohydrates, they're going to be taken to the right place. But it also means if you consume carbohydrates with fat, the fat is going to get absorbed a lot easier too, just because your body's hypersensitive. Now, the same thing happens when you're on a ketogenic diet or super low carbs. You're not having a lot of carbs, so you're not eliciting an insulin response, so you become a lot more insulin sensitive. Well, insulin sensitivity also occurs after a workout, because you've been depleting your body of glycogen, you've been working out really hard, and your body's ready to glom on to whatever you give it. So again, that's the whole theory behind it. So how do we combine all of this with a ketogenic diet? You see, because the problem is with ketosis, you don't want to be spiking yourself out of ketosis all the time. You need to be making sure that you're really keeping your blood levels of ketones elevated. Otherwise, it kind of defeats the purpose of the low-carb ketogenic diet in the first place. However, people that train with really heavy weights a lot of times find that they need a few carbohydrates in order to get the job done. The problem is that you don't want to be having your carbohydrates too high because then, of course, you're kicking yourself out of that ketogenic state. But a lot of times people that are training heavy, they find that they need to have just at least a few grams of carbohydrates to get through their weight training sessions. And that's okay as long as we're keeping it within that respective range. I generally say the upper limit of carbohydrates that you should be consuming, even if you're weight training when it comes down to ketosis, is about 50 grams. So if you want to allocate your carbohydrates to post-workout, that's fine, but it's going to be very, very difficult to keep your carbs super low throughout the rest of the day. That means you're not going to be able to have practically any veggies or any starches whatsoever. So here's what I'm going to recommend. And mind you, it all has to do whether or not you train in the morning or train in the afternoon. If you work out in the afternoon, carb backloading could be a decent strategy for you, so long as the carbs that you do allocate are within the respective range that you need to be in ketosis, meaning no more than 40 or 50 grams of carbohydrates post-workout. Okay, and that's only if you train in the evening, and here's why. Because you still want to be able to have the positive effects of low insulin throughout the course of the day. For example, if you work out in the morning and then you have your post-workout meal and you have a bunch of carbs, even if it's just 40 or 50, then you're kicking yourself out of ketosis for a short amount of time, and it's going to take time for your body's insulin levels to come back down, and you're eliminating the potential fat burning effects throughout the course of the day. But if you train in the evening time, you have all day to burn fat with your insulin levels nice and low. Then you work out and you allow yourself to be even more insulin sensitive, and you have a few carbs. It might kick you out of ketosis for a split second, for a couple minutes, but at least it's not going to slow down the fat loss that's occurring throughout the course of the day. But you also get the added benefits that come with carbohydrates in the evening time. Okay, carbohydrates allocated in the evening time allow tryptophan to enter into the brain. Insulin allows tryptophan to enter into the brain, and that tryptophan allows the processing and the conversion of serotonin into melatonin, which allows you to sleep. So thereby, it's going to help you sleep a little bit better. If you've been on a ketogenic diet, sometimes you know it's a little hard to stay asleep, and this is exactly what you might need. Now, it doesn't matter whether or not you train in the morning or night. I still recommend allocating your carbs as much to the evening time as possible. But again, you have to keep in mind that that's going to mean that your carbs throughout the course of the day are extremely minimalized. So I usually recommend having breakfast be exceptionally low carb, even lower veggie content. And then lunch, gradually add a couple carbs, and most of the carbs allocated in the evening time. So again, if you work out in the evening, carb backloading strategy might work well for you. But there's something that we also have to factor into the equation. When you are in ketosis, your body is extremely glycogen sparing. It means that your body doesn't normally blaze through all the carbohydrates in the body that it normally does. We hold about 450 to 500 grams of carbohydrates in our muscles and liver. Well, that means that normally you'd have to burn through 450 grams of carbohydrate to drain them. But when you're in ketosis, your body's utilizing ketones, which means that it's sparing a lot of that glycogen. So whereas a normal workout perhaps might burn 250 carbs, if you're in ketosis, that same workout might only burn 50 to 60 carbs because it's predominantly using ketones, which means you can get by with a lot less carbohydrates in your backloading strategy than if you were traditionally carb cycling. I hope that makes sense. It's a little hard to follow, so I'm going to break it down super simple one more time. When you're in ketosis, you don't need to top off your glycogen stores nearly as much as you do if you're not in ketosis, which means a backloading principle in conjunction with ketosis, if you're training in the evening, could be very effective. Again, so long as you do not exceed those 50 grams of carbs at the very upper limit. So I know this is a broad topic and I know it's a little hard to address, but in theory, backloading is not necessarily bad. It's just a little bit confusing and doesn't make a lot of sense when we truly look at insulin. So allocate your carbs to the evening, call it backloading or call it just allocating your carbs. I don't really care. But at the end of the day, that's probably gonna be the best way for you. As always, keep it locked in here on my videos and I will see you in the next one.